Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article refers to an alarming development with regard to Bhutan's border dispute with China. But in order to understand this article, first we need to understand the background to the border dispute between China and Bhutan. See, the border between China and Bhutan has never been delineated, and over the last 70 odd years, both the countries have always agreed that there are only 3 areas along the border where they have a standing dispute. This includes the Doklam Plateau in the western sector of the border between China and Bhutan. The Doklam Plateau, which was the source of a major military standoff between India and China in 2017, is located at the tri-junction of India, China and Bhutan, and it is of great strategic significance for all the 3 countries. Apart from the Doklam dispute in the western sector of their border, China and Bhutan have a dispute in the northern sector as well at 2 locations known as Jakarlung and Pasamlung. China and Bhutan have always agreed that these are the only 3 border disputes between them located in the western and northern sectors of their border, and they have always come to the understanding that if these 3 disputes are resolved through negotiations, then they can proceed to permanently delineate and demarcate their border. So as per this understanding, both the countries have held around 24 rounds of border negotiations between 1984 and 2016, and during these border talks, Bhutan has always kept India in the loop. To understand why India is kept in the loop by Bhutan during its border negotiations with China, we need to look at the 1949 Treaty of Peace and Friendship that was signed between India and Bhutan. This treaty provided for the establishment of a very special and unique relationship between India and Bhutan agreed to be guided by India in strategic areas such as foreign policy, defense, etc. Under this treaty, both the countries agreed not to interfere in the internal affairs of each other and not to allow their soil to be used against each other. This treaty was a recognition of Bhutan's strategic location for India vis-a-vis China's aggressive and expansionist tendencies in the region. So for India, Bhutan was a buffer state against China, just like Nepal, located strategically in the Himalayas. So since Bhutan and India both shared a common concern against China's aggressive and expansionist tendencies, they both decided to enter into a close strategic embrace through the 1949 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So as per this treaty, Bhutan agreed to be guided by India in its foreign policy and defense matters, and in return, India agreed to defend Bhutan against any external threats. Over the years, strategic experts and critics have often referred to Bhutan as a protectorate state of India, and of late, there have been instances where Bhutan has felt that it compromised on its own sovereignty by allowing itself to be guided by India in its foreign policy and defense matters. India acknowledged these concerns of Bhutan over the loss of its sovereignty to India in its foreign policy making, and hence it agreed to revise and update the 1949 treaty in 2007. This revised Treaty of Peace and Friendship provides more flexibility and autonomy to Bhutan in its foreign policy, but it still retains the close and special relationship that both the countries share. As a result of this close relationship, Bhutan still consults India while making key foreign policy decisions, instead of being guided by India like earlier. And in return, Bhutan has recognized India's strategic concerns, and as a result, it has not established any official diplomatic ties with the P5 countries, including that of China. With P5 members, such as the United States, Russia, etc., Bhutan has neither established its embassies in their countries, nor has it allowed these countries to establish their embassies in Bhutan. It deals with these countries through its representation located at the UN headquarters and the headquarters of the European Union. Then with regard to China as well, Bhutan has not established any official diplomatic ties, and for the sake of border negotiations, it deals with China through its embassy located in New Delhi. So while engaging in these border talks with China, Bhutan always consults India and keeps India in the loop, and this Indian involvement in Bhutan's foreign policy has always been resisted by China. This also explains why the Indian army entered into a military standoff with China in 2017, even though the Doklam Plateau region is not a part of Indian territory and is considered to be a part of Bhutanese territory. So over the years, 24 rounds of border negotiations have been held between China and Bhutan, but these talks have come to a halt after the Doklam dispute. So throughout this period of negotiation and even until now, the understanding amongst India, China and Bhutan was that the border dispute between China and Bhutan is limited to Doklam, Jakarlung and Pasamlung, located in the western and the northern sectors of their border. But contrary to this understanding, China has opened up a new dispute in the eastern sector, and this has come as a major shock to both India and Bhutan. In June 2020, China has claimed that the region surrounding the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary, located in the eastern parts of Bhutan, is a part of Chinese territory. This shocking claim was made by China when Bhutan was seeking funding for conservation projects at the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary under the Global Environment Facility of the United Nations Development Programme. See, the GEF was established in 1992 during the Rio Earth Summit, and it works closely with various international organizations such as the UN, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank. It also works with various governments, NGOs and civil society organizations in order to fulfill its primary mandate of financing environment projects around the world. Apart from this, the Global Environment Facility also acts as the financing mechanism for various international conventions, including the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Climate Change Convention, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, the Stockholm Convention on POPs or Persistent Organic Pollutants, and as well as to the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So in the past, Bhutan has received funding through the Global Environment Facility to carry out conservation projects at the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary. So in June 2020, Bhutan had submitted a new proposal to raise finances from the GEF, and in a shocking development, China raised an objection and it claimed that the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary and the region around it is a part of a disputed territory. This indicated that China was raising a new claim of sovereignty in the eastern parts of Bhutan, a region which has never been disputed in the past. Former Indian diplomats and strategic experts are looking at this new development as a part of China's strategy to exert pressure on India at multiple locations along the Himalayan belt. According to them, there could be a connection between the border tensions that have emerged along the line of actual control in Ladakh, particularly in the Galwan River Valley, and the border disputes that have emerged in Nepal and Bhutan. Indian strategic experts hold a strong suspicion that Nepal might have triggered the Kalapani border dispute at the behest of China. This is something we have already discussed in previous classes. Now, the new territorial claims of China in the eastern sector of Bhutan has caused a lot of concern for India because of its proximity to the strategic location of Tawang. See, if you look at this map, you will find that the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary is located deep inside Bhutan along its borders with the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. So the question is, how can China make territorial claims over a location that is located so deep inside Bhutan, that too along India's borders with Bhutan? To understand this, we need to look at China's claims over Arunachal Pradesh. China's new territorial claim over the eastern parts of Bhutan and the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary could be based on its age-old claim over Arunachal Pradesh and its depiction of Arunachal Pradesh as a part of its so-called southern Tibet. This new claim of China could be related to its refusal to recognize the validity of the McMahon Line, which is considered by India as the de facto border between China and Arunachal Pradesh. China's claims over the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary could be because of its proximity to Tawang, that is located just to the south of McMahon Line, and this could be another attempt of China to push its claims over Tawang, which is considered to be of great cultural and strategic significance for both India and China. See, Tawang, which is located in Arunachal Pradesh along the McMahon Line, is home to a Buddhist monastery that is seen as integral to Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan politics. In fact, the Dalai Lama himself is known to have stayed at the Tawang monastery for a number of days, and this could be one of the factors that brings Tawang under the focus of China. Since China annexed Tibet, it has been very much interested in consolidating its hold over Tibetan politics, And hence China could believe that its control over the Tawang monastery to be essential in order to gain greater control over Tibetan politics and push forward and strengthen its One China policy. Apart from this cultural significance, Tawang is also of great strategic significance to China because in the worst case scenario of a conflict between India and China, it would allow the Chinese PLA to access the plains of the northeast of India if it were to gain control over Tawang. Because right below Tawang, we have the Bomdila Pass, which serves as a connection between Tibet and the plains of northeast of India. See, this could be similar to China's interest over the Doklam Plateau as well. One reason why China has labelled Doklam as a disputed region with Bhutan is because of its proximity to India's strategic choke point, which is the Siliguri corridor. If China establishes a stronghold over the Doklam region, it gives China a great leverage in the eventuality of a conflict. Its proximity to the Siliguri corridor, which is a narrow choke point, could help China to cut off the northeast of India from mainland India. Similarly, China's new claims over the eastern parts of Bhutan, especially in areas around the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary, could be related to its claims over Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh. Because China's control over Tawang would allow it to strengthen its claims over Arunachal by defying the validity of the McMahon line, and it would also allow China to access the Bomdila Pass, which opens up to the plains of the northeast. In response to these claims made by China at the Global Environment Facility, Bhutan had issued a diplomatic démarche to China after consulting India. But in response to this démarche of Bhutan, China has reiterated that the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary and the areas around it are disputed, and thus it has included the eastern sector as well as a part of the boundary dispute. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, in which the writers evaluate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the conduct of democratic elections. In fact, we have had this discussion quite a few times over the last few months, and we have discussed how the pandemic can affect the conduct of elections due to the need to enforce social distancing while voting. So, in order to ensure that participation in the electoral process does not result in the spread of the pandemic, and in order to protect the vulnerable voters, the Election Commission of India has taken a number of measures. For example, to protect vulnerable voters, such as the elderly people and those suffering from comorbid conditions, the Election Commission has already decided to introduce postal ballot for voters who are above the age of 65 years by using its powers under the Representation of the People Act. Prior to this, postal ballot was available only to disabled voters and those above the age of 80 years. Now, as a result of the pandemic, the Election Commission has extended postal ballot facility to every voter above the age of 65 years as well. The writers appreciate this move of the Election Commission of India because it seeks to expand the voter base and ensure that as many voters as possible participate in the democratic process. In order to further these objectives of the Election Commission, the writers even suggest that separate voting booths can be introduced for senior citizens. Even though the article praises the Election Commission of India for introducing special measures to protect senior voters, its real focus is on the neglect and disenfranchisement of the migrant workers by the Election Commission and as well as by the government. See, as per the Economic Survey of 2017, there are around 14 crore migrant workers in the country, and most of them are not in a position to participate in the electoral process because they simply cannot afford to return to their respective constituencies on election day. See, there are a number of reasons as to why migrant workers have been disenfranchised, and the pandemic has simply aggravated the problem. See, as per the current provisions of the Representation of the People Act, for a voter to cast his vote, he needs to be enrolled and registered as a voter in a particular constituency. And migrant workers are usually registered as voters back in their native constituency. The reason why migrant workers cannot enroll as voters at their place of work is because they simply cannot provide the required proof of residence. This is very true in the case of seasonal migrants because they migrate to different cities and towns in order to take up work, and they usually take up temporary residence and they head back to their native constituency once the working season comes to an end. So the lack of proof of residence becomes a hurdle for the migrant worker to enroll and register himself as a new voter in the new constituency And if elections are held when the migrant workers are away, they won't be able to afford the travel back to their native constituency just to cast their votes. So as a result of these challenges, a majority of the migrant workers are not able to take part in the electoral process, and this is resulting in their disenfranchisement. So since they do not vote either in their native constituency or at their place of work, they are not treated as a vote bank by the political class and by the government. So this disenfranchisement of the migrant workers makes them lose their voice, and their inability to vote results in the neglect of their concerns and their well-being by the political class and by the governments. So the writers argue that the migrant workers have been simply ignored by the Election Commission and as well as by the government because they do not constitute a vote bank. See, interestingly, the mandate of the Election Commission of India is to expand the voter base and increase participation in elections. In a country with a population of nearly 1.4 billion, India has a record number of registered voters, which stands at 91 crores. This is what makes India the world's largest democracy, and this makes the Indian national elections the world's largest democratic exercise. In the 2019 national elections, data shows that out of the 91 crore registered voters, nearly 61 crore of them voted, which means nearly 30 crore registered voters stayed out of the electoral process. Studies have shown that out of this 30 crore, nearly 10 crore voters are not interested in electoral politics, and hence they do not participate in the elections itself. For this group, the Election Commission of India runs dedicated awareness programs in order to raise voter awareness in the hope that this would result in increased voter participation. These studies show that the remaining 20 crore voters are not participating in the elections because they are unable to cast their vote. Out of these 20 crore voters who are unable to cast their vote due to various difficulties and circumstances, a majority of them happen to be migrant workers. And nearly 3 crore NRIs are not able to cast their vote because they won't be in a position to ensure their physical presence in their respective constituencies on voting day. But since a large population of NRI voters are being left out of the electoral process, the Election Commission of India and the government have been considering to make special provisions for them in order to enable them to vote. For example, last year, the Government of India introduced a legislation in the Parliament to allow proxy voting through which NRIs could nominate their proxies who could cast their vote on their behalf in their respective constituencies. While this legislation has lapsed, it is quite interesting to note that the government and the Election Commission have shown a lot of interest to ensure that the 3 crore NRIs do not miss their chance to vote. But at the same time, it is ironic and unfortunate that they have chosen to ignore the migrant workers who are not in a position to participate in the electoral process due to their difficult circumstances. And these difficulties have been simply aggravated during the pandemic as a result of the lockdown. So in this context, the writers are calling upon the Election Commission and the government to pay attention to the migrant workers and provide special voting measures to them as well in order to ensure that they are included in the electoral process, which in turn would allow them to be recognized as a vote bank, and thereby migrant workers would be able to express their concerns to the political class and the government and ensure that their demands are addressed by them. The writers say that there are a number of voting options that are already available, which the Election Commission can make use of in order to ensure the inclusion of the migrant workers in the electoral process. For example, the Election Commission has already provided the electronically transmitted postal ballot system to service voters, that is the government employees, who miss out on the chance to cast their vote in their respective constituency as a result of the electoral work that has been assigned to them. On similar lines, the system of proxy voting has been extended to military personnel as well, and the Election Commission is even testing out an Aadhaar-linked digital voting platform through which votes can be cast virtually and transferred back to the respective constituencies. The writers argue that it is high time for the Election Commission to think of extending such special voting provisions to migrant workers as well, and they call upon the Election Commission to introduce the concept of ballot portability by bringing in a One Nation, One Voter ID system, which would be similar to the One Nation, One Ration Card project that the government is pursuing in order to ensure the portability of the PDS system for migrant workers. The writers say that In an era where digital banking transactions are transferring money safely, it should not be impossible to transfer votes as well back to the native constituencies. So the writers are calling upon the Election Commission to consider such special voting provisions through which the migrant workers can also be included in the electoral process. And the need for this has acquired a greater significance as a result of the pandemic and its disproportionate impact on the migrant class. Now let's take up another article from page number 9. The Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN has reduced its so-called taxes considering the impact of the pandemic. See, the NSCN-IM is basically an insurgent outfit of Nagaland, which was proscribed as a terrorist organization under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. The Isaac Muiwa faction is one of the factions of the NSCN, which was a separatist outfit seeking to establish all the Naga inhabited areas in India and Myanmar as a separate independent country known as Greater Nagaland. So these so-called taxes being imposed by NSCN-IM is not essentially taxes, but it is nothing but extortion. Over the years, due to effective counter-insurgency operations by the Government of India, the Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN has been weakened and it has been pushed to negotiate with the Government of India. In fact, the Isaac Muiwa faction is a part of the ongoing negotiations under the Naga Peace Accord. But even as the NSCN-IM is negotiating with the Government of India, it continues to run its own parallel governments and it extorts money from local businesses and local traders by threatening them with kidnapping and murder. So the running of such parallel governments by armed outfits threatens law and order in Nagaland, and it poses a direct challenge to the legitimacy of the government, especially the state government. In fact, these were the exact concerns that were recently flagged by the Governor of Nagaland, Mr. R.N. Ravi, in the letter that he had written to the state's Chief Minister. We have already discussed this topic in detail on the 26th of June, so I would request you to go back and watch this analysis. Now let's take up an article from page number 10. The offtake of food grains by state governments from the Food Corporation of India has increased significantly as a result of the pandemic. See, we have discussed in earlier sessions that in order to address the problem of hunger created by the pandemic, especially amongst migrant workers, the Government of India had announced the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Under this scheme, priority households and the Antyodaya Anna Yojana card holders and as well as migrant workers are being provided with additional allocation of free food grains. This provision is in addition to the existing allocation under the National Food Security Act, and naturally the state governments which implement the public distribution system have significantly increased their offtake of food grains from the Food Corporation of India in order to implement these provisions. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following statements are correct? Humayun's tomb is a UNESCO World Heritage Site located in Delhi. Its construction was commissioned by Humayun's son, the then Mughal Emperor Akbar. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect, so option A is the right answer. See, the construction of the Humayun's tomb was commissioned by his first wife, Empress Bega Begum, and not by his son Akbar. This question has been asked because on page number 3, the Hindu carries an image of the Humayun's tomb, which is being opened to the public along with all the other national monuments after they were shut down as a result of the pandemic. From today, the Archaeological Survey of India will be reopening all the national monuments, but it will strictly enforce social distancing measures. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following ministry or government agency has been designated as the nodal agency for investigating and mitigating landslides under the Disaster Management Act? The correct answer is option D. It is the Geological Survey of India, which falls under the Ministry of Mines. This question on landslides has been asked because on page number 8 and 9 we have two articles that refer to landslides in Karnataka and as well as in Manipur. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Indo-Tibetan Border Police or ITBP was raised in 1962 under the CRPF Act in the wake of the Sino-Indian War. Its primary role is to patrol India's borders with Tibet along with additional tasks such as counter-insurgency, internal security and disaster management. It functions under the operational control of the Indian Army and the administrative control of the Ministry of Defence. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. See, the ITBP was raised in 1962 as a direct consequence of the Indo-China War. This war exposed India's vulnerabilities with regard to border management and the lack of intelligence at the border level. So under the CRPF Act, the ITBP was established as a border guarding force. But later, the Parliament passed a dedicated legislation known as the ITBP Act in 1992, providing for its establishment. See, it is the primary border guarding force along India's borders with Tibet, and it specializes in collection of border level intelligence and as well as in high altitude warfare. The ITBP has been specially trained and equipped in order to acclimatize to the harsh climatic and terrain conditions of the Himalayan border. Apart from its primary role in border management as a border guarding force, it has also been given additional tasks such as counter-insurgency operations and internal security in few select areas, especially in areas affected by Maoism in central and eastern parts of India. And a couple of battalions of the ITBP have also received specialized training in disaster management, and they have been deputed with the National Disaster Response Force. But this border guarding force does not fall under the operational control of the army, and it does not report to the MOD. Instead, it is one of the central armed police forces that is under the administrative jurisdiction of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And also note that a few commando units of the ITBP have been deployed in Afghanistan as well to guard and protect the Indian Embassy and the Indian consulates. This question has been asked because according to this article, the ITBP chief has said that the morale of the armed forces is very high as a result of the Prime Minister's visit to the border areas in Ladakh where the clashes took place between India and China. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Compulsory licensing is when a government allows someone else to produce a patented product or process without the consent of the patent owner or plans to use the patent protected invention itself. It is one of the flexibilities in the field of patent protection included in the WTO's Agreement on Intellectual Property, the TRIPS, which stands for Trade Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. When a compulsory license is issued by a government, the patent holder loses their rights over the patent and they need not be compensated. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article, opposition parties have been asking the government of India to issue compulsory licenses for the generic version of Remdesivir, which is being used as an antiviral drug for treating COVID-19 patients. The government can invoke Clause 92 of the Patent Act, which is in line with the TRIPS provision of compulsory licensing, and it can allow India's domestic manufacturers to produce a patented product or a patented drug. For more information on compulsory licensing, kindly go back and watch our analysis for the 1st of April, wherein I have covered the topic in complete detail. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Article 78 of the Indian Constitution deals with the duties of Prime Minister with respect to the furnishing of information to the President. According to this article, it shall be the duty of the Prime Minister to communicate to the President all decisions of the Council of Ministers relating to the administration of the affairs of the Union and proposals for legislation. Both the given statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because on page number 10, The Hindu carries an image where Prime Minister Modi is briefing President Kovind on various issues of national and international importance as mandated by Article 78 of the Indian Constitution. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Symbiotic relationship or symbiosis is a close relationship between two species in which at least one species benefits. For the other species, the relationship may be positive, negative or neutral. There are three basic types of symbiosis, which includes mutualism, commensalism and parasitism. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, symbiosis refers to a close relationship of dependency between two species, wherein at least one of the species will stand to benefit. For the other species, this relationship could be either positive, negative or neutral. Based on this, we have three types of symbiosis. First, we have mutualism, where both the species stand to benefit. Then we have commensalism, where one of the species will benefit while having no negative impact on the other species. Then we have parasitism, where one of the species will benefit out of the relationship, whereas it will negatively affect the other species. Now I want you to take up a small exercise and identify one example for each type of symbiotic relationship and post it in the comment section below. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 16 which refers to a symbiotic relationship between caterpillars and ants. Latest research conducted by the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bengaluru has shown that ants protect young caterpillars from other predators, and in return, the caterpillars secrete a carbohydrate-rich secretion as a reward to the ants for protecting them. So this is clearly a case of mutualism where both the species are benefiting. Now let's take up a question from the 2016 prelims paper. What is or are common to the two historical places known as Ajanta and Mahabalipuram? Both were built in the same period, both belong to the same religious denomination, both have rock-cut monuments. See, Ajanta and Mahabalipuram, they were clearly not built during the same time period. They do not belong to the same religious denomination as well, because the rock-cut caves at Ajanta belong to Buddhism, whereas the rock-cut temple at Mahabalipuram belongs to Vaishnavite Hinduism, and hence both statements 1 and 2 are incorrect. Whereas both the historical places have rock-cut monuments, and hence option B is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, illustrate the pending border dispute between China and Bhutan in complete detail. The second question, the COVID-19 pandemic has posed several challenges to the smooth conduct of democratic elections. Examine them in detail with possible solutions that can be adopted by the Election Commission of India. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.